his district, that was the one that put him over the edge in Georgia, where he took the lead.
Yeah. It is an important point, as John Lewis, of course, in that march to Selma, of course, had his skull cracked open, who never, ever gave up, was unbendable, really, in his fight for justice and the fight for equal rights and the fight for equal opportunity that people could have that right. And that's why you see what has been, in the midst of a pandemic and the fear that surrounds a public health crisis, massive turnout for not only Joe Biden, but also for President Trump, a record number voting for a Republican president as well. And that should be noted. I want to bring in Nancy Cordes, who covers Capitol Hill for us, but also to talk about the historical significance of a woman becoming the first vice president in our nation's history.
That's right, Nora, and it was 36 years ago that Geraldine Ferraro became the first VP nominee in 1984 for Walter Mondale. And if you think back to that time, she was asked questions like, are you tough enough? And are you worried that the Soviets might try to take advantage of the White House if you were there because you're a woman? And you think about the questions that Kamala Harris got this time around. She got tough questions, but certainly nothing about her fitness to be in office because she is a woman. So that in itself is progress. And the fact that she now is the first vice president-elect who happens to be a woman is something that Geraldine Ferraro herself did not live to see. She passed away in 2011. But it took a couple tries, first Ferraro, then Sarah Palin, and now Kamala Harris will be the first vice presidential nominee, which means that California Governor Gavin Newsom will have the amazing, some would say difficult choice of selecting who he should replace her with in the U.S. Senate. He said this week it's a choice he wouldn't wish on his worst enemy because there are a lot of ambitious Democratic politicians in California, and they are all lobbying for the job.
And Nancy, we should note that Kamala Harris has just tweeted, this election is about so much more than Joe Biden or me. It's about the soul of America and our willingness to fight for it. We have a lot of work ahead of us. Let's get started. And it is an interesting statement by Senator Harris because it also echoes what we heard from now President-elect Joe Biden last night, where he kept on being focused on the work ahead, that there's a great deal of work ahead. Yesterday, instead of, he made a point clear. I've been meeting with public health experts today. We're thinking about how to fix this, about what to do when we finally get in office, as many people look to actually getting the virus under control.
Well, that does two things. One is substantively, there's a lot on the to-do list, so you got to get cracking. But then there's a political point, which we've talked about chapters. You do that, that turns the page. In other words, the future is already here. I'm already hard at work because I've been validated and I'm coming into the job. So it makes the future real.
But just the fact, John, that he would even acknowledge COVID, it seems like we haven't heard Donald Trump say anything about COVID, where people are still dying at an alarming rate. We've had 3 days in a row where it keeps topping itself.
100,000?
Yes, ultimately often leads to hospitalization, and that can lead to death. So it's still raging in this country. The fact that he would mention that and point out, I'm aware of it and I want to do something to fix it.
And speaking of turning pages, the Biden-Harris transition website is already up and running. Actually, has been for a few days, and they are preparing. I think we had an image of it to show people, but that work now begins much more seriously in the coming days. They've got a staff of just a few dozen that's expected to staff up to a few hundred. And one of the important inflection and stress points in Washington to watch in the next few days, there's a law that dictates how this works. There has been a transition team in place since the summer. At some point in the coming days, keep an eye on a woman who runs the General Services Administration, an obscure agency, but she's the one that keeps the keys to the transition office and has to determine when it is proper and official for the transition to really begin the process of thinking ahead to the next part of this and releasing money to the transition office to actually start working on this. If there is any holdup in there or pressure from the administration to do that, that would be...
But Ed has already started talking about his cabinet, that he wants the cabinet to be reflective of the country.
He'll do that.
That alone is sending a message about what the kind of place he wants to run.
As celebrations are erupting across America and Democrats are celebrating that Joe Biden is now the president-elect along with his Kamala Harris, we should note how Joe Biden was able to win this election. And Major, because you looked so deeply into all the exit polls, we should notice Pennsylvania has put Joe Biden over the top. Northampton County, that is a working class area that was once home to Bethlehem Steel. It is living up to its reputation as a bellwether. Biden appears to have flipped that county blue.
So white working class voters, by margins that were important, though not massive, moved to former Vice President Biden, which was, to get back to John's point a while ago, one of the theories of his case when he was going through the primaries. Put me at the top of the ticket, I'll be able to have a conversation in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania that will be decisive at the margins to propel me to re-election. He also, the exit polls tell us, both nationally and in important states, attracted young voters and attracted and kept the Hillary Clinton coalition of black voters. President ate into it in certain places, but not nearly enough. So the theory that Joe Biden presented to his party and eventually the country prevailed.
And there you see outside where we are in Times Square, the celebration continuing with boom boxes and hopefully masks as well, and social distancing, not to be a teacher, but we are still in the midst of a public health crisis, yes.
You know, to go back to Major's point earlier, is this is a situation in which an incumbent president has been defeated while his coalition has boomed. And there are a lot of people who see those celebratory pictures tonight, and as our exit polls told us, that makes them nervous. There are people who see those and celebrate with them. There are a lot of people in America who feel nervous when they see that celebration, and it will be among the first tasks for the president-elect to speak and hear to those people. And that's one of the big tests. He talks about empathy with respect to Joe Biden. That's the first test of empathy.
And isn't this only the third time that an incumbent president has been defeated?
Yeah.
In history, yeah.
Yes, in fact, he is the fourth vice president, if I'm reading this right,
To become president of the United States.
since 1804.
So Nora, back to your question about how Joe Biden won. Let's go to the national exit poll numbers. Non-white voters, Biden 72, President Trump 26. Voters under 30, Biden 62, Trump 25. Urban voters, Biden 60, Trump 37. Women, Biden 56, Trump 43. Tail and tape right there.
Yeah.
And if you look at, too, not only because Pennsylvania is the story at the hour, of course, Scranton, Pennsylvania, where Joe Biden was born, the state where Joe Biden made the case that I'm the candidate from Main Street, not Wall Street, as my opponent is. At the end of this vote counting, we may find that Joe Biden has also not only recaptured the blue wall that Donald Trump was able to capture in order to win, but not only Joe Biden recaptured that, but also win in other states, which we've not yet called, but states like Arizona and Georgia, two ruby red states
And Nevada.
that have not gone for a Democrat since Bill Clinton in 1992. And that will be part of the icing on the cake if those states ultimately go his way.
Icing on the cake, but also, again, as he tries to make the case that I'm the president of the whole country, he not only can say that he won the popular vote by millions of votes, but also that it was a geographically diverse and demographically diverse coalition. And that's important if you're trying to make the case that I'm the president for the whole country, which is what he's continually been making the case. I just want to add in one tiny little thing here is the process we're going through right now, talking about a president-elect, is the same process that allowed Donald Trump to declare himself the president-elect in 2016. In other words, it's the same process for those who are wondering about where we are in this election cycle. This is what allowed all the celebrations in 2016 when Donald Trump was elected president.
And that is part of what we are witnessing today, too, is not only the way that Joe Biden has not only won the white working class vote, but also suburban women who had backed Donald Trump in the last election over Hillary Clinton and swung back.
Yep.
What did we see about why suburban women were so decisive in this election?
The general sense is temperament. There were many suburban women who said, you know, if you were to ask me and pin me down on the policies, I would say I'm probably net Trump.
Yes.
But I'm not net Trump temperament. There's part of his temperament, his approach to the presidency, his approach to talking to the country or at the country that I find, if not offensive, so troubling that I will set my policy preferences aside to have a different. There are those who describe the presidency as the background music of American life. They wanted different background music because the presidency is always with us, and certainly with this president, you hear him all the time. And people wanted something a little different to listen to appraise, and to find comfort with. And suburban women consistently told us in the exit polls and in interviews, there were parts of his temperament that they just found uncomfortable.
Cindy McCain spoke to part of that last night when she joined us in Arizona, talking about, that she sort of crossed over the line and she was hoping other women would do the same. I talked to a woman in Connecticut who said, look, I'm smart, I'm educated. My husband is a doctor. I am a nurse. I've raised 4 children. I voted for him. I was the only one in my family that did. But now I'm embarrassed. I said, embarrassed? She goes, I'm embarrassed and ashamed because I didn't do my homework. She said, I would never allow my children to behave the way that he has behaved. And I think, to your point about temperament, I think after a while, even though you agree with his policies, which she did, she said, I don't want that kind of representation in the White House.
Anthony's surveys after the 2016 election identified a group of these kinds of voters who Donald Trump had rented. In other words, rented them enough to win in 2016, but hadn't purchased them. They weren't locked in. And they were always wary, and they started to drop off as he behaved in office.
Such a good analogy.
He did as a candidate. There was always a theory that the office would change him for these voters, and it did not. And they have been falling off. Some were taking a second look and going by, but they've been falling off steadily. So you can see a line from that first opinions they made in the early days of his presidency all the way to what Major was talking about, which is the ultimate conclusion that these college-educated white women
We did hear that a lot, John. Well, when he gets in office, he'll understand. He'll become more, quote, presidential was a phrase I kept hearing.
Right, and let's just go through some of the data. Voters who wanted someone to deal with COVID-19 and identified that as their top issue. They went for Biden 82-14. Voters who wanted a uniter in the country. Biden 76, Trump 23. Voters who wanted a president to exercise good judgment. That's their terminology. Biden 68, Trump 27. Voters concerned about climate change, not necessarily related to temperament, but part of the underlying conversation. Biden 68, Trump 29.
What were the Trump highs then coming out of those polls, Major, for the people?
Strong leader.
Strong leader.
Strong leader and economy.
And the economy. Yes.
Strong leader and economy. And for those voters, it was not even close. You see almost exact same lopsided margins on behalf of the president.
And again, we're looking at the pictures of celebration here in New York and in Times Square. This is a year that began with the impeachment of the president, then a global pandemic, historic job losses, more than 20 million job losses, and calls for racial justice. Let's not forget what has happened this year. Many people's lives have been changed forever. Nearly 250,000 Americans have passed because of this virus, and then this historic election and this incredible moment where it has been almost 88 hours since the polls closed until we were able to call it. But the importance of getting it exactly right, the patience it requires to trust the civil servants who carry out this oh so important democratic process of counting the votes so that it's exactly right, not only because it is in the heart and soul of our democracy, but also because that's what makes us different than everybody else around the world.
I call them the frontline workers too during this time. I thought David Becker made a really good point about who they are. They're normal, they're your relatives, your neighbors, your friends who are risking their lives really to go in and count the ballots. And sometimes at their own peril. There were reports that they had to be escorted to their cars because they were under attack.
In Maricopa County, reported that.
They were escorted to their cars. But I keep looking at the celebrations. You know it's a party when you bring your boombox from home and run into the streets.
Or that you still have a boombox.
I was going to say,
my
Nora.
parents do, Mom.
Or
I know. My mom
or that you still have a boombox and you bring it from home. Okay.
One point about what the president and his campaign are saying. They're talking about fraudulent votes and all these other things. Guess what, America?
What?
You can listen to the rhetoric, but when it comes to these matters, you better bring something to court that matters. And at this moment, at this hour, not one thing has been brought to court that is even actionable on any of these claims. And if the president wants to continue to lean on this rhetoric, this will have to be proven and established with affidavits and evidence. And until you have that, you have no standing.
And I wonder if I'm
So watch America for that.
Yes, and I wonder we're going to continue that, but I want to just flag Anthony Salvanto, who is watching it so closely, because I understand there are some votes coming in from Clark County in Nevada, and so I'm going to get him ready to tell us about that. Well, John, you make your point.
Picking up on Major, Republican lawmakers they have a duty right now. Now, let a little time pass to accommodate the freshness of the news, accommodate the president's idiosyncrasies, but at some point, if the president continues to claim fraud and that this is a stolen election, he will be burning Democratic furniture. And there will be members of his party who will know better. And the danger politically for them is that in this moment, when they know better, it becomes the verdict on their careers. They knew better and they did nothing.
But John, they've known that, to your point, they've known better for so long. and they've done nothing. That's why I'll be very curious to see what they do now. It seems they were starting to do the Michael Jackson moonwalk in these waning days. They were starting to speak publicly out loud against him,
And
some of them.
Nancy Cordes has something on that quickly. Nancy, you were going to say.
We are starting to hear from some of the president's closest allies in Congress who are claiming, Gail, that they don't believe these results, that they want to wait and let more votes
What
be
are their
counted.
names, Nancy?
Greg Steube of Florida saying, until we can confirm every ballot counted was legal, this race is far from over. Or Matt Gaetz, who now reportedly has contracted coronavirus himself from Florida, saying there's no future for the Republican Party if we don't stand and fight for real Donald Trump in this critical moment. You know who we haven't heard from yet? Republican senators. They've been very silent. They haven't come out and congratulated Joe Biden, but they also haven't said that they want to continue to see the votes be counted. The only person we have heard from, interestingly, John Cornyn of Texas, the senator there, who just won his own race, saying a Democratic majority in the Senate would cinch the radical agenda of the left. They must be stopped on January 5th in Georgia. So what he seems to be saying there is acknowledging that Joe Biden has won the race and that you need to prevent the Senate from going to Democrats.
Is this a moment for Mitch McConnell to set a tone and send a message? Is this a moment for him? Because he's released a tweet and he said, I said all I wanted to say in this tweet. Doesn't he need to speak up and say something?
He does, because he is the one who sets the tone for all the other Republican senators. He's the one who gives them cover to come out and say the same thing. So what he does in this moment will be very instructive.
With the exception possibly of Mitt Romney.
Exactly.
Mitt Romney may do it on his own, not wait for him.
Yes, that's
Nancy
completely true.
Cordes, stand by, because I just teased we are getting more votes in from Nevada and Joe Biden increasing his lead there. Anthony, take it away.
Yeah, just a reminder for all those folks who've been following all of these states along with us. We are still watching a couple, Nevada in particular. Now here, we've got Joe Biden with now a 2 percentage point lead statewide as we are getting more and more votes from Las Vegas. We haven't projected this race yet. It is trending toward Joe Biden. He's maintaining that lead. What we have been waiting to see is about 60,000 votes that Clark County reported to us that they had still yet to count. And so we're going to look and see what that final tally ends up being. But right now, as we get data in, Joe Biden, again, maintaining that lead in Nevada, which could, if this continues to trend his way, then add to his electoral vote margin. I will show you our total what's outstanding votes yet to count, 114,000 statewide, again, most of them in and around Las Vegas, Nora.
And what is our indication of what we know about that outstanding vote? What's preventing us from characterizing the race in Nevada?
Well, the outstanding vote, we are told, is by and large people who went in and registered to vote same day and asked to cast a ballot. So elections officials will validate that, make sure that's all proper and well, and then count those ballots. And then again, we are down now to that rather simple math of, are there enough ballots still outstanding for any trailing candidate, in this case, the president, to catch up? And the way that's looking right now is that number, that percent the president would need to catch up, is now over 60%. And that's really an indicator of where you start to get a sense that perhaps he cannot, because you compare that 61% then to what he's getting statewide, which is just under 48%, and that discrepancy between the two tells you that chances are that he won't be able to make it.
All right, Anthony Salvanto, thank you.
And this speaks to the gradualism of the vote counting and projections. There are those who might say, oh, you're hurrying and you're rushing to do this. Quite the contrary. This is a gradual process that's playing out first at the local level. It's being reported transparently in your state. You can watch it. You can watch it anywhere in the country. You can get onto any website and watch the numbers as they're counted. And they're observers, and it is working gradually and moving its way closer to absolute clarity. No one is rushing this process, either mathematically or in projections.
And the fact that it took this long, Major, and some would say it isn't really that long, but the fact that it took from Tuesday to Saturday shows that the process really was working as it should.
I started looking into this in July.
Yeah.
And I began talking to election experts, secretaries of state around the country, and they said, Major, the first thing that has to be understood across the country in this year with pandemic-related voting and all the processes we're going to go through is patience. Yeah. They said this in July.
Yeah.
And I began to talk about it internally at CBS, put together 2 podcasts on it. And it has proven to be absolutely that. And it was Republicans who said that to me. It was Democrats who said that to me. It was nonpartisan election officials. It was experts who've been studying this work for 30 years, and they were all right.
You know what? Years from now, no one's going to remember how long this took. You know what they're going to remember? The celebration in the streets with the boombox, you making the call on CBS. That's what people are going to remember. They are not going to remember, it took 4 days. No one's going to think about
But
that.
the unsung heroes who counted the votes,
Yes.
they will matter.
Let's talk
Yes,
about
and many of whom we have seen reports not only having their lives threatened and having to be escorted to their car, but there are reports from across the country that many of those who were counting the votes have themselves concerns about the virus or perhaps contracting it or be in contact with someone, because this virus is raging across America right now. We are now over 100,000 cases a day, as Gail pointed out, several days in a row. There is not been reports about the coronavirus task force meeting at the White House. The
They're
vice
not even
president
speaking to the president.
The vice president has not attended those meetings for about a month, and I think the president of the United States has not attended it for several months. So it's not clear what the national response or national leadership is, just as we are about to hit another wave just before Thanksgiving and the holidays, when many families were hoping.
And Nora, don't you remember one of the first things Joe Biden said that he would do after firing Donald Trump? He says it would be to hire Dr. Anthony Fauci. That was one of the first things he said he would do.
And while it was a catchy line,
Yes.
it's not substantively true.
Right, yeah.
He's already got the job.
Yeah, right. It would be news to the doctor.
Since we fact check
Right.
everybody, we'll
Right.
fact check.
I know, but the point I'm making, I know
Yes.
that the point.
Despite his
the point I'm
experience in
making.
Washington,
Yeah.
he doesn't know how the hiring works.
But he certainly knows, but the
Yeah.
point he's making is, I will make this a priority.
So he has said.
And I will get the top person to handle it.
Yeah. I want to, it's interesting, as I spoke with the Biden campaign for many months, as I know many of you did as well, they said that the race was remarkably consistent. Stable. They felt that there were not many things that could change the trajectory of the race, that there was a sense that he could head towards victory if they didn't make any mistakes, if they were consistent. And that's why you saw what quite frankly was a relaxed travel schedule, I'll call it that, or perhaps one that was in keeping with keeping people safe on the campaign schedule. He did not travel as much as the president did. But I wonder if it was that, was there a mood that they sensed, or was there a moment when the campaign changed? Charlie Cook, when I first started out in politics, I worked with him, and he said the race really changed on October 6th. That was the week that the president got coronavirus. The campaign came on thin ice. There had been that first debate that was such a debacle. Was that really the moment that crystallized this? I'm curious your sense about what brought us to this day.
So John Anzalone, who's the pollster for Joe Biden, told me, look, in September, a tremendous number of events happened even before October. And nothing changed in the overall national orientation of Biden to Trump. It was
Not
about
the
6 to
debates,
7.
not the president getting
No, I'm talking about
coronavirus?
This is September.
This is September.
Okay.
And then October basically confirmed all the stability of September. The first debate showed people this temperamental part of the president they simply weren't comfortable with. If they weren't beginning, they were certainly not afterwards. It confirmed essentially the stability of the race in September. And the polling data remained internally in the Biden campaign relatively consistent on that point.
And in October, people start voting, which means you start locking in that portion of the race, which is a little bit different. More and more people are voting earlier. It has been a very stable race, but it is extraordinary the sandbags that Donald Trump stacked in front of himself to withstand an extraordinary deluge. I mean, approval rating under 50%, economy in the tank. And he is failing by the majority of the country's opinion on the number one thing they care about, which has killed 230,000 Americans.
And he still got
yet
70 million
close.
votes, and still he came close.
Exactly. So stability of race, but, there was also a lot of nervousness that there might be a surprise, and there was a bit of a surprise.
And was that the economy? Were those sandbags the economy?
I think it was a combination of things: economy, identity politics, and identity connection with Donald Trump that is all about just an absolute visceral feeling in your stomach. And go ahead, Ed.
Well, I was just going to say, I would argue, having followed the campaign day to day, they felt confident back in May. The first few weeks after the pandemic were total panic time because they were convinced they'd never break through again. But they saw the damage the president was doing to his own standing by behaving and leading the way he did. And I think the fact that they maintained that limited travel schedule until closer to the convention was a sign that they knew they didn't need to travel. They didn't need to be out and about. Let me convey a few other things, though, because this is a team, we have to give some credit to the Biden operation. They did all this virtually. They did all this with Twitter off. And that's how they've been doing it since this campaign began. going back to the crowded field, I ate a few weeks ago, I said, how have you guys done this? They said, it's very simple. We turned off Twitter. We stayed away from it. We knew that the country was in a different headspace than social media would suggest, and they pulled it off. And I just heard from one of these aides today who, again, speaking to the fraught nature of this pandemic era, had to drive home to Boston last night to get a COVID test so that his wife could go to work on Monday and won't be able to celebrate with his colleagues tonight in Delaware.
Well, let me just show you,
The bittersweet nature of
while
it.
they're not living in the era of social media, they are now posting pictures
They are.
of celebrating.
That is fair. They sure are.
Let's just show everybody real quick. My apologies, John, and we'll get to that in a minute. I want to show everybody because what's happening in the land of the Harris campaign. This is Doug Emhoff. This is the husband of Kamala Harris. This moment saying, so proud of you. And this will also mark the first time we have had a man as, what do we call him?
America's second man.
The second
What do
gentleman.
we call him?
The second
America's
gentleman.
second gentleman, yeah.
Yes, as we have.
Is he the first dude because he is the first guy to hold the job?
Well, I think we're calling him the second gentleman, is the phrase that.
Those of you at home, write in with your suggestions.
Exactly.
Can I?
will allow you to vote on social media.
Can I, going back to your point, campaign restraint is a crucial thing for a president to have, and campaigns usually don't encourage restraint from anyone, and social media ends restraint. Joe Biden showed restraint, as you were just describing, in at least two important places, and I wonder what you all think was more important. The restraint not to swing at all those pitches during the primary, not to go for the Green New Deal, not to go for universal health care, not to go for the most liberal part of the party. Was that the more important act of restraint, or the decision not to campaign, which also had a behavioral element, which is don't spread him so thin that he starts to make mistakes on the stump, as all candidates do, which then give
I'd
fodder.
argue it was the holding back on the Green New Deal and such, because they knew that his theory of the case was, I am the more moderate, mainstream guy who can win back those states that they appear to have done. And he knew that supporting those kinds of policies, or at least talking about them and appearing to embrace them, would be anathema to too many people.
But Ed, people didn't expect him to go and have those shoulder-to-shoulder, face-to-face rallies with Donald Trump. But I did hear people say, can he go and knock on some doors, put on some protective...
One place he went earlier this week, actually, is this place here.
Yeah, he went to his home and signed on the wall.
Right.
Signed on the wall. From this house to the White House. But I do think there was some criticism that they needed to, there seemed to be no energy to any of their campaign appearances. And I think that was very worrying for a lot of people.
Well, but this is, again,
doesn't matter now because
this speaks to the sort of steady pace that they had. They didn't need energy, because they knew that in this country there were a lot of people who wanted competence, who wanted soberness, who wanted somebody who wasn't as flashy, but who was going to be serious. This photo we were just showing, this is...
Of the house?
Of the house, was taken by a Philadelphia Inquirer reporter a little while ago. This is Joe Biden's childhood home, and there are people now out there this morning taking pictures. He was there on Election Day and went inside and signed the walls of the house and wrote, quote, "From this house to the White House with the grace of God, Joe Biden."
But that home is particularly important because Joe Biden grew up there. His father didn't have a job, and that's why his father moved to Wilmington, Delaware, to find a job. And that's why the family ultimately moved to Delaware, where Joe Biden always had in his life, if you read his biography, a sense of longing for something else, to go to the Catholic school that his family couldn't afford, to want to be somebody he couldn't be. And that is an ultimate American experience, to want to try and improve your life. And an American experience that many people can identify with is someone in your family having lost their job, a sense of loss, a sense of longing, a sense of not having something. And that is who he is authentically as a person. That's the party that he has joined, the Democratic Party. And it was ultimately, I think, the biographical contrast, which wasn't always clear, but certainly one that they wanted to make with Donald Trump, someone who had inherited wealth from his father, who lives in a triplex on Fifth Avenue and has a much different sentiment about how to govern. And that really was this clash, not only of the ideology of the parties that they represent, but the personalities of the two men and the people and the things that they care about, the values that they have as part of their core being.
And Joe Biden also has a life experience that deals with the tension of ambition, grief, and loss. From his Senate career, which began with a car accident that killed his wife. And he asked himself, should I stay in the Senate? I think I should quit. Mike Mansfield, the Senate Majority Leader at the time, said, no, stay. This will see you through. Then his son. Well, he's dealt with loss. And when you talk to people on Capitol Hill and people around the country, it's rare that they say the same thing about a political figure. I know Joe Biden. I have a sense of him. People who see him up close in a legislative dogfight, and people around the country who meet him maybe once or see him at an event or have some sense of him. I think I know him.
You brought
That
up
matters.
You brought up Beau Biden, who is the shorthand. He has his father's names. He's Joseph Robinette Biden II, and he has the name of his father, who Joe Biden visited his son's grave on the day of Election Day. There were more than 1,200 people that went to Beau Biden's funeral in Wilmington, Delaware. One of them was the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell. And that is also part of the loyalty that Joe Biden has also practiced throughout his own life, attending the funerals of other. You always remember who shows up at your funeral,
really
your
do.
family's funeral or something like that.
Really do.
And Mitch McConnell also extended that. And that will become a relationship that becomes very important in the coming months, because as you noted, if there is this desire within the progressive wing of the party for big change, right? Expanding Obamacare, well, not the Green New Deal, but something like that, to roll back the tax cuts, whether it get any judges approved, he's going to need, if the Republicans hold on the United Senate, he's going to need Mitch McConnell as his best friend. And can personality and friendship extend beyond partisanship?
Well, if you read Mitch McConnell's book, The Long Game, and listen to the way he describes Barack Obama and the way he describes Joe Biden, he says Barack Obama would come into negotiations and spend 45 minutes telling him how wrong he was and how ideologically askew he was. Joe Biden would come in, forget that business. I know what you can accept and what your coalition can accept. This is what my coalition can accept. Let's work in the in-between space. That is the deal-making. Bill Clinton said the Constitution's subhead should be, let's make a deal. That's what Joe Biden grew up in. That's what Mitch McConnell grew up in. The question is whether they're going to be allowed in politics today to do that kind of thing.
What would be your prediction based on what you know about the two men? That sounds encouraging listening to it.
The question is whether the two men can overcome the structures of politics today. A lot of people talk about Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. You can't do that anymore. The structure of politics is too incentivizes people to be partisans.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, can those two men help the system improve? They won't be able to do it themselves, and that'll be one of the great questions of the Biden presidency.
To amplify John's point, it is a lost art in Washington these days to understand your opponent's coalition and strengths and weaknesses, because we are so polarized, we don't pay attention to each other. But the way you create legislative compromise is to understand just how far your opponent can go. Not how far you can go. Of course you know that. That's the easiest thing to know in politics. Yeah. The harder, more important thing to know is what your opponent can and most importantly can't do, and talk about what is doable. Joe Biden has that legislative experience, and he is going to need it now more than ever before. And when push came to shove during the Obama presidency over things about the debt and tax rates, the deals were put together by Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden.
I want to pick up on something major that you said about Joe Biden when you said, we know Joe Biden.
People said that about him. Yes.
People said that about him. But at the Democratic convention, I thought James Clyburn was very powerful when he says, but Joe Biden knows us. We know Joe Biden and Joe Biden knows us. And that means a lot. And you heard story after story about Joe Biden reaching out to people, extending a hand to people that you've never heard of, checking on them to see how they were doing after they lost someone, checking after they lost a job or they lost a family member, a conductor on a train. I mean, he does that kind of thing when the cameras are not around and is not seeking attention for it. That says something about the character of this man.
Clyburn was echoing an anecdote that was said about FDR. A reporter went up to a man who was crying, and he said, "Why are you crying? FDR has died." And he said, "Oh, did you know him?" And he said, "No, but he knew me." Right. So there's an echo of this through American politics.
The Biden campaign now makes it official that the president-elect and vice president-elect will address the nation later tonight from Wilmington.
Did they give you a time? We would like
all
to be
politics is local.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lana Zach. Thank you for joining me. We have breaking news. CBS News is now projecting former Vice President Joe Biden will be the 46th president of these United States. And his running mate, California Senator Kamala Harris, the first female, the first Black, and the first Asian American vice president in our nation's history. The CBS News decision desk determined Joe Biden has the electoral votes he needs, and mathematically, President Trump is now unable to win the the race. After days of counting, here's a look at the vote in Pennsylvania. That state and its 20 electoral votes put Biden over the 270 needed to secure the presidency. President-elect Biden has been urging calm over the past few days as the vote totals were being tabulated. Given the large number of mail-in ballots from Biden's supporters, the former vice president initially trailed President Trump on Election Day. But now that millions of mail-in votes have been counted, Biden is over the top in both electoral votes and popular votes. Biden will become the fourth vice president to be elected president. He's also the 11th man to defeat an incumbent president, and his running mate, Senator Kamala Harris, makes history now as she is set to become the country's first female vice president, also the first of Black and Asian American heritage. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are expected to address the nation later this evening. Of course, we will bring that to you as well. Biden released a statement saying, quote, "I am honored and humbled by the trust the American people have placed in me and in Vice President-elect Harris. In the face of unprecedented obstacles, a record number of Americans voted, proving that once again, that democracy beats deep in the heart of America." With the campaign over, it's time to put the anger and the harsh rhetoric behind us and come together as a nation. It's time for America to unite and to heal. We are the United States of America, and there's nothing we can't do if we do it together. The Trump campaign is responding in a statement as well. Quote, "Beginning Monday, our campaign will start prosecuting our case in court to ensure election laws are fully upheld and the rightful winner is seated. The American people are entitled to an honest election. That means counting all legal ballots and not counting any illegal ballots." For more on this now, I want to bring in CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin, it has been a long time getting here, but we now have results. What is it like where you are right now?
Hi, I'm coming to you live again outside the Pennsylvania Convention Center, where the votes of Philadelphia County have been counted, and that's why we've been reporting out here all week. And people in Philadelphia know that that's where all the votes have been, and so people driving by are honking their horns. People are shouting outside their windows, cheering for Joe Biden, because they know that Pennsylvania put him over the edge with those votes coming out of Philadelphia here today. It's a poetic finish for Joe Biden that Pennsylvania put him over the edge to these 270 electoral votes. This is the state where he was born, in Scranton. This is the city where he launched his presidential campaign. His headquarters is here in Philadelphia. It's a state that he said that he would win, and according to our projections, he has, and thus is the projected winner of this presidential race.
Now, Caitlin, there in Pennsylvania, obviously, it is the state that put Biden over the 270 electoral votes needed. It was also President Trump's last pathway to success. There were a lot, I hear all the horns honking behind you, but there were also a lot of Trump supporters that were there as well. Have you been hearing from any of them? Have those crowds dispersed?
Absolutely. This was a key state for President Trump, and one that helped him to victory in 2016. Remember, the margin there was just 44,000 votes. So the president saw this state as critical to his path to re-election, and that's why you've seen his campaign waging all sorts of legal challenges to the vote here. We saw yesterday and the day before lots of supporters of the president gathered across down the street at the on the other side of this building, saying that without evidence that this was a fraudulent election, they were saying without evidence that this had been stolen from them. And on the other side, as we had been reporting, you had supporters of Biden and supporters saying count every last vote. Remember, here in Philadelphia County, this is the most populous county in the state, and votes have been continued to be tallied since Election Day because of all of the absentee voting. It has just taken a while to count those votes. This morning, Philadelphia County released a couple thousand more votes, and as those votes had been tallied, that is what allowed news outlets to make the projections of of how Biden would do. So Pennsylvania, a critical state throughout this whole process, and today is the state that put Biden over the edge.
Yeah, for our viewers who are watching at home, they can see that former Vice President Joe Biden now leads President Trump by tens of thousands of votes with 98% of the votes in. So I want to bring in now our panel of Leslie Sanchez, Antoine Seawright, and talk a little bit more about this from a political perspective. Leslie is, of course, a CBS News political analyst and a Republican strategist. Antoine is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. Hello to both of you guys. Leslie, do we have you?
Yes, can you hear me?
Hi there, Leslie. You're a Republican. And it's funny even saying Republican because it seems like under the Trump administration there have become different definitions to that label. There was the Lincoln Project Republicans who were opposed to President Trump. There were the Trump Republicans who were not necessarily those fiscally conservative Republicans that had been the bedrock of the party for so long. But as a Republican strategist, what is your initial reaction right now?
Well, first off, if this is the case and these are going to be the final numbers and it is actually verified, then many congratulations to the new president, right? We all come together as Americans once this is determined. So that's by far what we stand at as Americans. But I think, Alana, you were on the most critical question. This is not the Republican Party of George W. Bush, an administration I worked in, an administration that relied on suburban moms and more of the affluent suburban areas, that built on national security, kind of that three-legged stool of Ronald Reagan, economic conservatism, national security, some social issues. It's a very different Republican Party. It is Trump's Republican Party, which is what's going to be in the aftermath. It is much more middle class. It is much more rural. And there was a trade-off of middle class for the affluent, kind of diverse, increasingly diverse suburban areas. And what's the most important thing I think we have to think about today, on top of all this transformation, over 70 million people supported this president. And if you took out the fact of the big weight that you have of California and New York, that the president's popular vote, he wins by 1.4 million. Now that's ridiculous to discount those big states, but they weigh so much in terms of the anti-Trump effort, in terms of never Trumpers, in terms of the Lincoln Project. I think their effect was de minimis, was really small. What we saw was a rise in Hispanic support, which I'm really kind of interested in dissecting and breaking out. In Arizona, it broke for Biden. But in other states, in Texas, you're seeing growth. In North Carolina, you saw growth. You certainly saw the growth and the transformation happening in Florida. This is only midway through the story of the new alignment of the Republican Party, and to some extent, the Democrats as well.
I think that you should be congratulated as well, Leslie, and all Republicans who today are being gracious at this news, and sincerely, because it has been a divisive election. It has been a time where the United States, the very questions about our democratic process have been questioned. And Antoine, I want to bring you in now because this has been 4 years in the making for Democrats. You're from South Carolina. You'll remember, of course, that Joe Biden really has a lot of credit to give to South Carolina in his ability to stand before the nation tonight and say that he is in fact becoming the next president of these United States. I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit, just first off, about your initial reactions to this news.
It's an emotional day. So many of us put blood, sweat, tears into the past 4 very long years to get to this point. And the country owes a great debt of gratitude to my friend, my political father and mentor, Jim Clyburn, because he literally rearranged the cards of history to get Joe Biden to this moment. And to the people of South Carolina, I took some hell when I said the road to heaven in the White House runs through South Carolina, and we were going to decide who the next nominee will be and have a large say-so and who the next president will be. Well, nevertheless, that has come to be true. And every time this country has needed recalibration, Lana, it's been because black voters have stepped up to the plate and did it. Joe Biden would not be here. He would not have been the Democratic nominee without strong, deep, and wide support from black voters all across this country. The same very hands that once picked cotton now pick presidents, and for the first time in American history, put a black woman on the ticket as the vice president-elect of these United States. I'm so thankful for all those things that have happened. And to Leslie's point, yes, President Trump still has a coalition of voters that put together themselves to make this race closer than most people think it should never have been. But at the end of the day, every time the American experiment decided to bend, the good news is it never broke. And I think that is what the story of this election will be. We decided to bend along the way, but we never broke. And that's why we have this historic moment for all of us.
It is a historic moment. And Antoine, you're usually so exuberant. It's interesting to see you today, seeming to be a little bit
Lana,
somber,
it's so emotional
reflective.
for me because it's emotional for me because nobody knows what it took to get to this point. Nobody knows what it feels like as a black man to be able to speak in this moment. And the country owes black people so much to get us here, because if it wasn't for black voters in Wisconsin, Georgia, and Michigan, and Pennsylvania, we would not be here. We would not be here.
It's powerfully emotional, I think, for all Americans as we have been dealing with this pandemic, dealing with this election, dealing with racial reckoning, for us to recognize that as we are trying to sort our way through our history and look towards our future, that it is a powerfully emotional moment. To your point, Antoine, I want to show our viewers the black voters and how they did turn out in large numbers for Biden, 87% to 12% for President Trump. We do know that President Trump was able to make some inroads with African American males, but as you're saying, Antoine, Joe Biden owes a great debt of gratitude. His presidency, actually even his candidacy, to African Americans. I remember well after winning South Carolina, he told his supporters emphatically then, because he had been counted out at that point, he said, "We are back," and that is absolutely owed to African Americans. Leslie, you heard Antoine talking about how historic this is, how monumental and personally important this is to him. Kamala Harris is obviously the first vice president to be a female, the first female we have ever put in one of those top two seats. For you, as a woman, how does it feel?
It's excellent to have more women. This is exactly what the foundational support you need to see the first woman in the White House as commander-in-chief, right? I wrote a book, You've Come a Long Way Maybe, talked about all of the aches and pains women have struggled throughout their careers, throughout the media attention, throughout just personal party politics, and throughout the challenges of raising money. In many cases, Hillary Clinton broke a lot of those barriers when it came to being the woman who could raise more money than anybody, regardless of gender. And what you're seeing now is a continuation, a transformation. But there's a lot of women on it down ballot, including Republican conservative women. There's a rise of pro-life conservative women that have gone, ethnically diverse conservative women that have moved forward, that they do not match the tremendous success of Democratic women in 2016. But in terms of equality and trying to get those numbers up, women are showing that they can. And by far, we've seen it on the state level as governors and seen it at state level as state leadership. But on the federal level, we have to continue to see those inroads, and we're seeing that today. So I think that's a tremendous step forward. But I keep bringing us back to the fact this is America's election, right? There's so many people. I am reminded continuously when people, say, thank gosh, they were tired of Trump. They were tired of his antics. They were tired of his race baiting. In many cases, we don't have enough time for the amount of frustration that Republicans, Democrats, Independents have had. And I do think a lot of this dismantling on those fringes, Trump did that to himself. But there are so many people that say, we miss this, we miss this. What we don't understand is this is not all these people loving Trump as much as they don't like politicians. They don't like the way Washington has worked. And when you talk about women, women are not seen traditionally as part of that establishment. We've always been the outliers. We come in to change a system that has not worked for us in the past, and ethnic minorities fall in that category too. So it's a big step in this movement this country is moving through, and for that I'm so proud, and I can tell you how much I have enjoyed every minute working with Antoine, because he has the pulse of this country in a way that should be admired by everyone.
Gosh, look at these Republicans and Democrats getting along so well here. You know, Leslie, I told my 6-year-old daughters that this is going to be the first female vice president, or actually what I told them was this is the first time a girl is being elected vice president, and they couldn't believe that. This is, as you say, this entire election has had gains for women. But this comes at a loss for President Trump, and he is saying at this point that he is not interested in conceding. I'm wondering, given the historic nature of this election, of both Vice President Biden becoming the next president and Kamala Harris becoming our nation's first female and first person of color to occupy the vice presidency. Does President Trump need to be concerned about his place in history if he doesn't become gracious in his concession here?
It's hard to think that the president can do anything in the last 20 minutes that he hasn't done in the past, right? You know, in terms of just grinding the country to a halt or going his own way. But I will tell you, there is a legitimacy to his concern that every legal vote was counted. If you talk to a lot, and people say, oh, it's just Trump supporters, and people try to discount that. That's half of this country who are really concerned about a Biden presidency because of policy implications. They're really concerned about, leads that shrunk. We have to calmly and methodically move through in a way to legitimize this election so everyone can come together. And Trump is going to do his antics like he always does, but at the end of the day, it's going to take strong leadership and strong guidance and a graciousness, quite honestly, on both sides to welcome the olive branch and start healing this country. But I will tell you, we're going to be in this situation in 2 years, and we're going to be in this situation in 4 years. We are in the middle of this chapter in terms of the topsy-turvy and how these voters want to see this country run. So everyone is on alert.
Yeah, I do want to talk about the future of legislation, but I wanted to bring you in as well, Antoine, because I know that you have something to say on this point about graciousness and President Trump and trying to bring our country together.
Donald Trump is going to be Donald Trump. We know who Donald Trump is. The good news is we know who Joe Biden is, and the even better news is Joe Biden knows us. And Joe Biden has taken hell from his own party because he has already said, although he may be running as a Democrat, he's going to be an American president. And for once again, in this little first rough draft of history, you have a Democratic president, a Democratic House, and a Republican-led Senate. I'm very confident that Joe Biden's ability to be able to bridge gaps and bring groups of people together who may not agree 100% on policy is what this country needs. That's why I'm totally convinced he received Republican support in this election in places traditionally people would have probably voted for a Republican president. The needs of this country do not have Democratic or Republican labels behind them. They're American issues. On day one, we will still be struggling through this pandemic that has ripped the fabric out of who we are. We still will have eviction crisis to deal with, healthcare, education, infrastructure, all the things that did not get done in this last Congress, and that is what he's going to have to deal with on day one. And I believe that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is what this country needs, and they're going to do what they can to reach across the aisle to get this country back on track. Because I don't think, and Les and I agree with this because we've talked about it in private, I don't think this country, no matter where you fall on the political side, can afford to be ripped apart even more. That's not who we are.
But the sad truth of things, Antoine, is that, as you mentioned, it looks very likely that there's going to be a Republican-controlled Senate. And the sad truth of things is that partisanship has become vicious, has become ugly in American politics. What do you think it will mean if, and I should say that there are still question marks about whether Republicans will in fact control the Senate. There are still 2 races in Georgia that are going to be decided, it looks like, in January. But do you believe that a Republican-controlled Senate will work together with Biden, especially given what Leslie said, that just around the corner are going to be the midterm elections, Antoine?
I think there will be people in the Senate who are willing to put the partisanship aside to work with Vice President Biden, or work with President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. You mentioned that the temperature is very high right now, and that's very true. But most of us would agree that we've been in this posture before as a country, and leadership starts at the top. I do not see Joe Biden being the aggressive attack dog style leader as we saw respectfully from this president. I think he will come with an approach of trying to work together. I think his cabinet will be very inclusive to include people who may not be in his own party. And I think he will surround himself with the right people who have one agenda, and that's to make the American experiment better. Look, at the end of the day, we will face the midterms. In fact, the midterms will be so consequential because all around this country, lines for Congress are going to be redrawn by legislatures. You're going to have some of the most consequential governors up for re-election in 2022 that won in the 18 midterms, a year the Democrats did very handsome around this country. And you're going to have some U.S. Senate seats that will be on the ballot that could trick what the formula looks like in terms of what the majority looks like, regardless of how the 2 seats play out in Georgia. So there are going to be so many things going on, but I don't think anyone agrees that the base root thing this president will have to do, President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, is deal with this coronavirus. That is the nerve center to most of the issues that we are facing right now.
All right, Leslie, I'll give you the final thought for the moment. What about you? Do you believe that a Republican-controlled Senate will cooperate with President Biden and specifically, to Antoine's point, work together to pass right away some legislation regarding coronavirus relief?
We're still going to see how the makeup of that Senate looks like. Very positive about Republicans, but absolutely. I mean, this is not the first time around for, the cooling temperature of the Senate, the cooling effect of being the institution, the body that has fewer ripples and kind of understands the Obama administration, understand the Clinton administration. And it really depends on leadership in the House. I will say that Republicans have been very successful in working with Bill Clinton's administration on everything from telecom, just budgeting. So it's been divided Congress. Americans tend to like that. I think we'll see success on that, probably more so than you would see if it was one-party rule. But again, the clock is already ticking. I think there's going to be a strong analysis of understanding what middle-class voters want, what this economic populism movement is about, and a realization, including among Republicans, that Trumpism and this whole idea of Trump, that it doesn't go away without Trump, that there is a body of 70 million plus people who really feel the country has failed them, and they're looking for a different type of leadership. That's going to be the question for both sides.
Indeed. Leslie Sanchez, Antoine Seawright, I'm going to continue checking in with you throughout the day as we expect to continue to get more reactions and more headlines coming in all day. But thank you. At the moment, I want to bring in now Derek Muller. He's a professor at the University of Iowa College of Law. Derek, obviously, President Trump, we're already hearing from. He and his team are mounting a major.
These declassified documents reveal the extent to which FBI abused the FISA spy warrant system.
Let it be an arms race.
Thank you, AP. Trump, you're fired! 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 To the next one. Yeah. Yeah.
Today, Lester Holt in Savannah got for you in New York the moment the entire country has been waiting for after a very close race. NBC News now projects that Joe Biden has won the Keystone State, Pennsylvania, and its 20 electoral votes.
And that means we can now project that former Vice President Joe Biden has been elected President of the United States. He is President-elect Joseph Robinette Biden at 77 years old. Chuck, we'll turn to you. This map is a real interesting one, not necessarily the path that anyone thought would have unfolded, but here we are.
Here we are. Look, we got just enough vote in order to call Pennsylvania, even if it may slip into a recount. We think there's just mathematically nearly impossible for the order of finish to change in Pennsylvania. And when you look at it in many ways, Joe Biden won with a somewhat traditional map in the Midwest. He rebuilt the blue wall, and narrowly, but he did it. He added 2 sort of expansion states, it looks like, potentially, when all's said and done, with Arizona and Georgia. But the fact is, he did it without it. And it proved that 4 years ago, the biggest important lesson from this election is that 2016 was not an outlier. This is essentially the 2016 election with the Gary Johnson vote going to Joe Biden. And here we are.
All right, Andrea.
I'm thinking of the 32-year quest for the presidency of this man, his resilience in the face of failed attempts in the past, a very slow start, stumbling out of the gate, losing the primaries and caucuses, reclaiming it on Super Tuesday, and taking a centrist message, which will now challenge him. His ability to reach across the aisle will be challenged on the left within the Democratic Party, but the empathy, the fact that he was so policy-directed, which comes from his whole career during COVID, which I think was the biggest story of this closing part of the campaign, his response to the pandemic and to the racial inequality, the protests after George Floyd, really spelled that appeal to suburban women and others in broadening that appeal that Hillary Clinton simply could not reach in the 2016 map. And that